Let's hit that intro.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
And Lisa's back at it. She's hit that number one spot Lisa. Once again. Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, guys. Looking forward to an amazing episode today. Ken, thank you so much for joining us. Ken is
happy to be here.
The chief of analytics at DAT Analytics, and I caught the show yesterday. A bunch of nuggets. I love the having Nicole Glenn on. It was actually really insightful to kind of learn about the expedited and the LTL portion of freight itself.
Yeah, it was great. She's been on a few times, and she's speaking at our big conference here in a month or so. So it's going to be awesome.
Good morning, Samantha.
Awesome. Morning, Samantha.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. Jeff, I know you've been on vacation. How's the vacation going? I know you're kind of pumped to kind of hit today. Today's kind of like one of your favorite days.
I needed that, to relax, kick back, re-energize myself, and redesign, implement, some of my new tactics for my business and my partner. So it was great just to sit there and watch the waves crack and just have that piece of paper and a pen and nothing around me, man. There's nothing better than that to get stuff done. So
that's awesome to hear, buddy. And good morning, everybody. Good morning, Daman. Good morning, Ashley. Good morning, Samantha. Adam, sorry, Ken. I was looking at the video yesterday, and it mentioned that line haul rates, basically kind of getting back to 2018 for dry van and reefer, which is kind of unheard of after everything we've kind of been through and things like that. Can you explain a little bit more? Just kind of go into that a little bit. What we're kind of seeing from the analytics side.
Yeah, I mean, on the dry van and reefer side, it's a pretty similar story. We're seeing kind of normalization, as kind of crazy as that sounds, right? I mean, normal feels weird. It's been the theme around these parts anyway. We're probably underperforming seasonality. I mean, just having been in the industry for 10 plus years now, I would expect a little bit more strength heading into this part of the year. I don't know how much the minor rail disruption last week is impacting that, but it's definitely a slower start to seasonality. But honestly and truthfully, if both of those equipment types stay relatively flat through the year and fuel stays below $5 a gallon, which given the futures market, it has probably some room to move downwards, I don't think it'll be overall a bad peak season for carriers. Flatbed, on the other hand, is worrisome. I think you're really starting to see the manifestation of the high interest rates in the housing market, the commercial construction market. Flatbeds are growing ever the more worrisome, if you will, as we head into the fall.
Yep, that's for sure. Now, in what part of the country are you seeing the most impact on the flatbed business?
Well, it's kind of the lack of impact, right? I mean, the Southeast is still relatively active, but not nearly as active as it should be, right? Pacific Northwest is a bit of a bright spot. If you look at our MCI maps, you see a lot of the regions out there in the Pacific Northwest. But this is a map that, especially around this time of year, you would expect to see a lot more red than you see now. That's sort of the big square states. As an old ops engineer that I studied under, what taught me about. Those are relatively cooler than we would expect. Up into New England's pretty cool. And then kind of like the geographic upper Midwest, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Again, cooler than what we would expect given that market. And I mean, it's a common misconception. A lot of people think that there's very little flatbed freight on load boards. And that's kind of the opposite, right? We see a ton of traffic on the flatbed side, and given some of the public reporting of our competitor Truckstop, they do as well. So the spot market for flatbed is rather vibrant, and it's struggling a bit right now.
Yeah. How about Texas? What are you seeing out of Texas? Because that's usually a heavy outbound out of that area.
Yeah. I mean, Texas, you can sort of score a line from Houston up through the state into Oklahoma, where it's still kind of red. But those border markets are all very soft right now. Getting up into New Mexico, again, still soft. It's really just that sort of northwest angular line coming up from Houston that's the only real bright spot in that region right now.
Yeah, I find it interesting because we have a new client on board that moves quite a bit of flatbed out of the Brownsville, Texas area up into Edmonton, Canada, Alberta, and other provinces up there as well. And I mean, we see some pretty good volume coming out. I was just wondering, compared to others, what you're seeing. Like Laredo is usually a big heavy hitter. That's always been what's been going on in that area. But I was just curious. I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, again, I think Texas, you see that corridor up from Houston, which makes total sense around the narrative of, crude prices are still high. So you're still going to have, like, the flatbed market is two of the largest sectors driving flatbed would be energy, mainly
Yes,
crude, and construction. And when construction is lagging behind significantly, that pulls the market down. But it makes sense why we're still seeing activity in the energy side. What's interesting, though, is we're not seeing a ton of activity in that Bakken shale region, which usually lights up when crude prices skyrocket. I mean, in North Dakota, South Dakota are both relatively dormant at the moment. That Bakken region mainly being that North Dakota stretching into Saskatchewan, Manitoba, even northeastern Montana, if I'm getting my maps correctly. But you mentioned Laredo. Laredo is loose capacity for flatbeds right now, and that doesn't happen all that often.
No, that's what's kind of odd.
Yeah, El Paso very loose, Lubbock very loose, Amarillo very loose. The only kind of bright spot in the Texas market is Houston, which is about as tight as it gets right now.
Interesting.
Crazy to think about it. And even for myself, like I do a little bit of entertainment logistics, and our customers have kind of transitioned from using flatbeds and step decks and even roll tights to just, hey, we'll just have the trailer there and just have somebody as a power only come and haul it, right? So when we usually expecting on a per show maybe 50 or 60 flatbed loads, they've actually all moved to power only loads. So
yeah.
Same when I was in the industry. We actually did the Monster Jam shows, and one of our big sales conferences, they brought, I think, Gravedigger or Goldberg out in front of
Gravedigger, good old Gravedigger.
This bougie hotel in Florida. They pulled up a monster truck in front. But yeah, the drivers love those loads because they usually get free tickets to the show, and they just sit around power only and then go show to show. They're good paying. A lot of that's contracted though, right? We don't see that on the spot market.
Yeah. It's different there.
Yeah, what I'm seeing out of the Texas market as far as flatbeds is that we're moving a lot of steel pipe, and so we have a mix of flatbeds and step decks as well. So they're not looking for specifically a flatbed. They're all 53s that we have to move, but I just find it a little interesting that Laredo, is just down, man. It's very odd.
Yeah, it is. And it's not much better in the dry van side either. Houston, at least, from a dry van perspective, Laredo remains slightly tight, with Houston, again, being the bright spot. But McAllen is pretty neutral. It's El Paso that's very, very loose on the dry van side. So if you have optionality as a shipper to move freight a little bit further west, I know there's some complications coming up through Chihuahua up there. As it pertains to safety, but something to be mindful of.
Yeah, we got also some dry vans coming out of Houston back to Southern California, and then also from Houston into the Archdale, North Carolina area as well. We just picked up some of that. So, but we didn't have any problems like getting the carriers in there because we're not transactional. We're more dedicated type of service providers. So we're starting to get a lot of dedicated loads now out of those areas. Wow.
From there. And even for like the impacts, like like you said, like this is kind of coming on the spot. Even for me, I was doing some calls and some prospecting yesterday, and some of the new prospects I've spoken to, like they've said that they've wrapped up their RFPs already, which is like it's kind of unheard to kind of think about because usually like this season is kind of when we kind of get into it. Do you kind of see any kind of fluctuation, especially when flatbed really doesn't hit really RFPs that I kind of work on, but do you kind of see with the dry van, especially coming out of Houston, coming out of Texas, that hey, whatever I kind of rated you today and we've kind of closed up might not be what we're looking at come like Thanksgiving, which is in a couple months or so?
Yeah,
True.
I mean, I think one of the impacts on the RFP cycle you mentioned is just shorter procurement periods. So
Yep.
typically they may have operated on 6 or 12-month procurement periods, but during COVID, that was almost across the board shortened to 3 to 6 months. And a lot of big shippers were forced to go to 1 or even every other week procurement cycles. There was a large non-perishable food shipper that we talked to that was procuring week ahead. Because they were, of course, on the non-perishable food side, it's perishable on the inbound and non-perishable on the outbound. So they were having a real hard time getting their capacity locked in. So I think shorter procurement cycles mutes out some of the peaks in that bid activity. Because I mean, I used to work in pricing. That was my role when I was in industry. And you could bet around spring and late fall being the big RFP seasons. And I just don't know that that's going to be the case anymore.
Yeah, because a lot of the larger Fortune 100 companies really start putting their RFPs together to do their budgets and forecast, starting out for next year. And then you have the Japanese companies that their fiscal year ends on March 31st, and then their new year starts on April 1st. So there's usually a lot of activity. Like when I was working for Panasonic, we used to do a ton of RFPs, and they used to be locked in for a long period of time. But, with the high volatility in the market right now, and carriers aren't really extending their offers for a long period of time because of that fluctuation and everything's going up and down, that they have to shorten that period, like you said, Ken. And I think you're going to see that more often than anything else now, because they're getting wiser, they're getting smarter, and they just don't want to lose their shirts. They're not in a position to lose their shirts.
I think that's right. And I think another thing that's going to happen is you're going to see contract rates move faster. I mean, one of the reasons why contract rates move a lot slower is because procurement moves a lot slower, right? On the spot market, every shipment is a chance to enter a new price into the market, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with contract, with RFPs, if you're on an annual procurement cycle, let's just say that it was smooth. Every month, 1/12 of the market came up to bid. Well, you only have the opportunity to impact 1/12 of that bathtub, right? Chris Kaplis, who I work with, who I'm fortunate enough to work with, has the bathtub analogy. You have hot and cold water coming into the bathtub, but they slowly change the temperature of that larger body of water. But imagine like it's a kitchen sink now, and that's my spin on it, right? Instead of a bathtub, it's a kitchen sink. And so, whereas contract rates don't change as fast as spot rates, they're changing a lot faster than they ever have in the past.
And the other thing too, Ken, is what's hurting a lot of shippers there. They want to save money, so they're dropping the contracted rates and they're going into the spot market. But what happening is is that they're not showing any loyalty to their carriers, and they're just saying, hey, pricing is everything to us, and they just jump on board. But that's going to hurt them in the long run, especially if they're a big shipper. And they need those select carriers in their corral, because when they get into a pinch and they go out to their carriers and they said, hey, can you help me? And it's like, well, what have you done for me lately? And they remember those things. So if you're a big shipper, it's always important to keep feeding your carriers throughout the year and keep them interested. But when you cut them off by the ankles, man, they remember that stuff, and it's definitely not part of the collaboration to build long-term business relationships. You're shortening them rather quickly.
Yeah. And I think too, it's really important to understand that. I mean, shippers run the gamut, right? I mean, a small mom and pop business that's running an Etsy store is a shipper. Walmart's a shipper. And I think someone, Samantha Jones in the comments mentions Walmart's like, Walmart could have a once a decade RFP if they wanted, I'm sure. That's the power they exert on the market. I don't think if you and I opened up an Etsy store selling Ohio State merchandise, I don't think we could kind of go to the big truckload carriers and say, hey, I want to go on an annual RFP, because they would tell us to pound sand. So it's such a vibrant market on the shipper side, and there's so many different pockets, right? Retail is different than retail grocery. You know what I mean? Like retail hard lines is different than retail grocery, is different than service-driven businesses, and inbound shippers are a heck of a lot different than outbound shippers. Yep. So it's hard to generalize the contract market. Whereas the spot market, is pretty much ungeneralizable, right?
Yes.
By
It's a free
definition.
for all. It's a battle
Yeah.
royale.
Yeah.
Right.
We're rumble up there. And even for me, like I was talking to like a customer yesterday, and they were saying that, hey, we're just gonna ride out this year, and they're actually waiting for their budgets for next year. They finish up their fiscal period in September, so they're saying, look, we're not going to make any changes. We're honestly just waiting to see what the budget looks like, but hey, come meet us next week and let's see what we can get you guys positioned up to see what we can do. So I think like with other companies, and they're a very well, they're a pretty big company as well, but you're going to find people kind of just waiting and kind of leverage that spot market. Like Jeff just mentioned, we were working with a customer that they did all contracted in the middle of the RFP. They actually found out that they actually lost that customer, so they're a 4PL. So everybody did all the rates, and their actual customer that everyone did the RFP for, they went to another 4PL. So it was like, oh, okay, like what kind of happened here, right? So we're gonna see the shift from mids the sharp. We're gonna see the shift in movement, anyways.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
know, unfortunately, too, some of these sales rep, and I noticed it a lot, especially being in the industry as long as I've been, is that sometimes they extend themselves when they really shouldn't. And what I mean by that is that they'll take a lane that has a horrible OR, and they do that, and they say, "Oh, yeah, we'll take that on to complement the account." No, you won't, because when you look at the whole account as a whole, it's like that high OR is going to affect the rest of the account and bring it up as well. So, you know, when they say that, you should definitely not take that on. You know, find that niche carrier, go and do like it's like going up to the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, right? Who the hell likes to go up there? You know, when you have to go out and get your you know, your niche carrier to go up there, but sometimes they'll take it on, and it's like, well, what's your OR? Well, we're operating at 114. You know, it's like, why are you doing that? So, you know, you have to be more smarter in that as well to drive the cost down.
See, I don't give a damn about the whole state of Michigan.
I wonder why.
No, I think, you know, the thing about budgets that you mentioned with shippers is really interesting, because I think a lot of us that operate in the spot market tend to forget that shippers bear the full brunt of the fuel surcharge, right? And if they don't have a good idea if diesel's going to come down to $4 or stay at $5 next year, that is a huge difference when you're moving freight millions of miles.
Right. And also, Ken, and one thing, you know, there was a lot of disagreement with me, and then some were like, yeah, you're right. Unfortunately, there's a lot of unethical brokers out there. The upcharge, the fuel surcharge, which I think is totally unethical, because when you think about the percent that you're paying, you know, let's just say it's 64 cents a mile that's tagged onto your base rate, right? Well, when you're upcharging that, they're not paying 64 cents a mile. You and I both know that. They might be paying 71 or 72. So that should be a pass through. You know, you shouldn't be, you know, marking up fuel. That's just my own opinion. When I do my bids and stuff like that, I don't do that. You know, it's like the accessorials and stuff like that, liftgate or whatever. I do that as pass-throughs. I don't know how you feel about it, but I just think it's unethical.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. I mean, there are certainly bad actors in this space. I know the carriers that struggle with it, right? There are carriers that are like, look, this fuel surcharge program is reimbursing me at 6.5 miles per gallon. I know that I can run at 7.2, so I'm going to make a little bit of money on fuel. So I'm going to go ahead and sharpen my pencil on the rate. So I think it becomes a little bit more gamification on the asset-based side, which I'm okay with.
Yeah.
But I think you're right on the non-asset side. It's
yeah, I mean, because you think about that, right? And thank you to all the carriers that are out there that are moving our freight. I mean, this is, you know, Driver Appreciation Month. You know, I make it a point every once in a while to go to truck stops and hand out gift cards and stuff like that. Even though they don't work for me, I just appreciate it, and because there's just a lack of. But to get back to what you're saying, Ken, about that fuel surcharge. Hey, those guys are struggling on fuel. And when you look at how much they're putting into their bank, hey, upcharge it and give it to the damn truck driver. He needs it more than you do. I mean, I just don't feel it's fair. I mean, that's just my own personal, you know, approach to that, because they're hurting. They are hurting. And for them to be operationally fit, as I would say, is that they need to be about 25% of the total cost to operate profitable. If they
Yeah.
get way above that, they're hurting, and then you're squeezing the hell out of them. And what are you doing in the long run? You're hurting yourself. You're hurting your
Right.
customer. You're hurting everyone on that. But a lot of people out there just don't get it, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm happy to see. I mean, we're down 90 some cents from the peak of diesel, with indications
Yeah.
that it's going to continue. You know, the EIA forecast has it in the mid fours by the end of the year, early next year. So I think we'll see some relief there, but it's definitely causing some volatility in shipper budgets, right? Because regardless what happens downstream, the shipper's paying out the money per their printed fuel schedule. You know, so I know that's going to be difficult. I don't think they understand. They don't have a good understanding of where contract rates are going to land. I mean, I think we're trying to triangulate it. It seems like we're most of the way there. You know, it seems like probably by Q1, early Q2 of next year, we're going to start to see contract rates start ticking back up, would be my guess.
Yeah.
So
because they're getting pulled down with the spot market and stuff like that. I mean, you see it all the time. But when is that going to level off? I mean, you do see movement in hot areas and then cold areas, like you were saying, and then you see those contracted rates are starting to bounce back a little. I'm not talking, sufficient enough, but we are seeing a little bit of a uptick, and that's based on specific lanes, right? I mean, you see it all the time. You see the ones that are really starting to bounce up, and then the ones that are falling by the wayside. So it's just a mixed market out there still. So.
Yeah, and that's really what COVID did, right? It kind of brought the edges to the middle, right? It said, look, right now you'd expect all the port for the dry van, you'd expect all the port markets to be hot, gearing up for retail. You'd expect Harrisburg and all the, Louisville, Memphis to be hot for e-commerce. But what you're seeing now is during COVID, it brought all the markets tight, like Denver outbound. It's like, what? Like, no, you run free basically Denver outbound back to LA and make it a round trip.
Yeah.
But now, when you start to lose the profitability in those tails, it just brings things back to normal, right? You saw this real bunched up curve around these really high rates, and now you're just starting to see a more normal bell curve of. Actually, it's kind of a tipped over bell curve, right? There's more loads that transact a little left of the mean, but then you have a lot of the high paying loads out, right? So, it's. I for one, I know it's hard to say because you're very right about the carriers getting pinched, but it is nice to get back to some sense of normalcy.
Yeah, whenever that's going to happen. I mean, we all hope that it does, because then we start seeing more sustainability in the market, and then we can really start measuring things a lot easier, because it's just all over the place, and it's just hard to manage because you're always engaging, which you should anyway, with your customers and telling them about what's happening in the market and why their rates are fluctuating and all of that. That's why it's just kind of hard on the contractual agreement. I know Samantha Jones was just saying that she had like their 3 companies or whatever that are starting to get back to the the annual RFPs. Personally, I just don't think it's sustainable. And the one thing that I always did when I spoke to my carriers is that, hey, listen, if you put those contract rates in front of me right now, don't come back 3 months from now and say you have to take a 4% increase. That's just not going to fly, and Ken, as well, is that some of the smarter sales reps that are out there, they'll put that buffer in that with that expectation from late spring and then fall kind of thing, where they're trying to keep a little bit of a bounce in it. So they kind of equal it out. So it kind of makes sense. But sometimes that doesn't work, especially this past year. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think the one saving grace, and we've been talking about this a lot, is that there hasn't been the Class 8 truck capacity from the OEMs to really drive a nail in this market, right? I think that will protect this market from itself. But what's going to be really interesting, if you read a lot of the OEMs' press releases and earnings reports, they're expecting to get caught up on orders and deliveries and get normal windows in Q1 of Q2 next year, which is when we expect the market to start turning back up. So I think we'll have a lot of discussions. Maybe I'll even be on the show with Dean talking about it, about will that new capacity stunt, the market recovery? Because that could be a real possibility. But then also, I think the average age of the power units has been increasing through COVID, right? The big asset fleets have not been replacing their units at their average clip. And while it doesn't sound like a lot to a layperson, going from an average power unit age of 4.2 to 4.7 years, that's huge. That's a lot of trucks that didn't get backfilled, right? So I think 23 is going to be a super interesting year as it pertains to like getting back on track of normalcy.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on, is really looking forward to 2023. Just compared over the last 18 months, I mean, it's just been beyond crazy. I mean, that's a huge understatement. The fluctuation all over the place, and trying to gauge and pinpoint it. It was just like trying to find a needle in a haystack. You can kind of have a little bit of predictability, a little bit, I would say, but once you think that it's going to happen, it didn't happen, or it happened, but it didn't happen a lot. So it's just crazy. It's people want sustainability. Let's face it. It's easier on both sides. You as a service provider, and then also on the freight payment side. On the shipper side, they say, "Oh, okay, yeah, 6,000, 6,000, 6,000." All of a sudden, 6,800, 5,800, 7,400. And they're all over the place. So it's really hard for them to gauge, to put a structured forecast and budget in place, because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Well, it's just like the flood that kind of happened in BC, right? Like I'm from Toronto, and we saw, like, normally from Toronto to BC, maybe 5-6 grand, but because of that flood, we were seeing like I even saw as high as 25 grand, for just a regular load. And just because they got to kind of divert maybe like an hour or two, but there was just no consistency. We're kind of seeing that consistency a little bit getting back on the Canadian side, domestic, from what I'm kind of seeing with my own business. But we want that normalcy again, because it's something that we can prepare customers for, we can prepare our carriers for, and we can just get from there. Ken, I wanted to ask you, I know Hurricane Fiona's kind of been wrecking havoc a little bit. Has there been any impacts on the freight market, North America, or anything that's happening outside of that potentially could impact North America?
Well, there's that. You actually went where I was going to go next. There's that disturbance that's going to slip into the Gulf of Mexico here in the next 3 or 4 days. And I think that's the one to keep an eye on. I think the models are split on it kind of breaking up over the Yucatan versus sneaking into the Gulf. I think if it gets into the Gulf and spins up, that could be a big event. Fiona's more, again, no one wants to see loss of life or property, but FedEx and DHL and other air freight providers always have a bit of a bump whenever there's a Caribbean storm, because they're flying in medicines and all that stuff. And no one needs it more than FedEx right now, to be frank.
I was just gonna say that. You're right.
But yeah, if we get a storm in the Gulf, especially given how some of those Gulf markets, like I mentioned, Houston, are really tight for capacity right now, it could be a very interesting week next week. Hopefully, coming off a nice weekend. Right, we're barreling into end of quarter. Right, we're heading. When will be end of quarter? Next Friday.
Yeah.
And that's always, again, this is what I try to teach new folks that come into our industry, right? Whether they're data scientists or engineers, the freight calendar is very important. If I think about how much time I spent in the industry with the ops team looking at the calendar, right? When does Easter fall this year? Is it early or late? When does 4th of July fall? But when you have end of quarter here falling on a Friday, it's going to be a busy week next week.
Oh, it's the push. What I did was the ROG, receipt of goods, where everybody sales needed to be established and completed by the end of each month. So at the end of the last week, 4th week in a month, there was that heavy push, and we were out there at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, just to make sure that carrier broke dock. As soon as they broke dock, there was a sale,
Exactly.
And so there's such a huge push. And to your point, with what's going on, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting. And hopefully, if that storm doesn't come into Texas, or if it does, that there's a lot of smart shippers out there, and they look at the what if scenarios. I love looking at the what if scenarios to try to protect myself and my customers, just in case something like this happens. Hey, let's start moving a little bit more freight prior to that, in case something happens. But some of them go, don't worry, I've been through 10, 15 of these things, it will pass. And then what happens? They get caught with their pants around their ankles, and then they struggle, and then they start calling every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there. I need a carrier. I got to get in here. And by that time, roads are flooded, everything. They can't get their freight out. And then it's like, I should have. Well, don't look at it. I should have, Look at the what if scenarios and get going.
Well, look at the FEMA carriers. Right? Sorry.
What's that?
Yeah, I was saying, look at the FEMA carriers as well, right? Because some people who are contracted to work for FEMA, that, hey, if something bad really happens and they get the call, like I've been talked to a carrier that, hey, I can't talk to you about this load anymore because FEMA's calling me, right? And it's that you've got to prepare for that in your what if scenario as well.
They'll start staging if the model if it gets into the Gulf, they'll start staging early next week, right? They'll stage. Usually, what they do is they stage a lot of that support stuff 100 or 200 miles away. You both know this, but for your audience, right? And then they'll move it once something happens because they don't know exactly where it's going to hit. They don't want all the supplies to get ruined by the storm, so they'll stage it a couple hundred miles away from the shore, and then as soon as something hits, they'll mobilize. But yeah, if my best advice to folks listening to this is if it looks probable to get a hit, I would treat next Wednesday like Friday, right? Treat that as your Friday. Yeah. And get that freight moved because you're barreling into the biggest quarter of the year for most of your shippers, and they want to get that stuff off their docks and start fresh for Q4 for sure.
Absolutely. Yep. So get going, guys.
Yeah, get moving.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And that's like probably like the one big takeaway. I'd definitely say like, have those conversations, like, like just make sure that you're kind of prepared, like just don't kind of read the news and not action it as well on your own. Right.
Right.
I know that, Kyle, I know that, that Ken, that DatCon's coming up a couple of weeks or something like that. That's something that you guys are like, I was taking a look at it. It's amazing. I think Terry Bradshaw is going to be there as well. Can you explain
Bomber?
Yeah, the blonde bomber. Can you explain a little bit more about what's kind of going on at DatCon and what we can look to expect?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a weird sports fan. I grew up in Pittsburgh, moved to Ohio. I'm going to be an Ohio State alumni, so I'm a huge Steeler fan. So yeah, we're going to have Terry Bradshaw, and he's a great speaker. He's going to talk about why not be great, right? That's going to be, I think, the theme of his talk. But throughout the week, we're going to have events for shippers. Right? We're going to be talking state of the freight markets. We're going to have roundtable discussions with our shipper experts. On the broker side, we're going to be talking about RFPs. We're going to be talking about ways to manage relationships. We have a three-pronged panel with a broker, a shipper, a carrier, senior execs from all three, talking about kind of the middle ground can be the high ground. We've got, of course, the market updates. So we'll have Dean Croak making his illustrious return from Ireland to enlighten everyone on the freight markets. Really great speakers. And then also, if you're a frontline person, a lot of learning labs. My entire team will be there, kind of hand over mouth, showing you how to use our rating tools, our predictive pricing tools. We'll have folks from the load board showing you how to best use those tools to find capacity or find shipments. It's really fun. Plus, it's Austin. Ton of great barbecue. Austin City Limits starts on Saturday of that week, weekend one. So tons of great music. I'm looking forward to it. I actually spoke at DatCon 3 years ago as a customer, and that's when I was recruited to come work here. So wow, this was my first one. This would be my first one as an employee.
Wow. And you know something, Ken? You said something which a lot of shippers and service providers and carriers should do is collaboration, carrier roundtables. Don't wait for these type of meetings. You should be holding those like every quarter or as you are ramping up new product, releasing things, keeping everybody engaged, informed, what's happening. Are you slowing down? Are you increasing? What's the next month going to look like? I mean, I used to have carrier roundtables and we didn't talk about rates or accessorials or anything. It was more about the operational side, on sales and ops and getting everybody together. And that really forms a very good bond on many different fronts because now you're building real true business relationships that helps everybody out on all sides of the fence. So I would strongly recommend you doing that. It really benefits. I mean, Ken used to be on the pricing side. He'll tell you that it really helps them for predictability on what's going to happen in the next, how much capacity you're going to need. And they take that all into consideration, especially when you start learning about carrier operations, because carriers have just as many needs as shippers, but shippers fail to understand what those carrier needs are. And if they did that, trust me, I believe Ken would tell you as well, there's a lot of benefits behind that where you become a preferred shipper and then the carrier becomes a preferred carrier. And then you really start nailing it and you start saving on the back end. You really do.
Yeah, I'll give you a story of how that works in reverse real quick because I know you're probably up against it, but I won't disclose who the company is, obviously, but it was a Korean company, and they handled all their procurement domestically for 10 years. And they built their thing on relationships. They would send across their big sales that they would have for President's Day or Tax Day or Black Friday to their carriers, and they would kind of sort out who was going to handle the overflow capacity. Well, corporate made a decision to kind of rehome the procurement using kind of the more staunch Asian method of procurement where it's more adversarial, right? That's how they're typically used to procuring things,
Right.
and pitted carriers against each other, fragmented the carrier base, and they essentially lost all service for their 3 biggest sales of the year. They were scrambling like you would not imagine to get freight covered because they didn't have the relationships.
That's it.
We had a guy, the ops supervisor that handled that business was on call 24/7 during one of their sales events. He would pick up the phone no matter what to make sure their freight was moved. And when you fragment that to nameless, faceless carriers spread all around the country, I don't think you're going to get the service. You might get the price, but you're not going to get the service.
Nope. That's the whole thing where you can listen. I love it when people say, "Oh, we can guarantee capacity." I just, or I have the cheapest rate. I just started laughing because Ryan doesn't have the cheapest rate. I don't have the cheapest rate. Nobody has the cheapest rate. You just keep stepping down that ladder and getting lower and lower and lower. And capacity, listen, unless you were God, you can't guarantee anything because there's so many different exceptions to the rule that can just throw a wrench in. It's unpredictable. You don't know if there's going to be a car accident. You don't know. You can't predict that, man. And when you say that, you're putting yourself in a position that's kind of hard to climb out, man. You got to be careful what you say because nobody can guarantee capacity. No way.
No, someone on our show mentioned yesterday guaranteed LTL, and it just made me crack up. It's like an oxymoron. It's like saying giant
That's
shrimp.
the worst one to guarantee.
Yeah, it's like what?
That's funny. Yeah, it's one thing you should never do. I mean, a lot of people do that. Hey, good for you, but hey, I've been on that receiving side for 35 years, and the calls that I used to get every single day working in very complex logistics operations on the 3PL and 4PL side. I try to help people out as much as I possibly can, what not to say. And let me tell you something. You want to get that phone hung up real quick, just start saying that you've got the cheapest rates or that you can guarantee capacity. And I'm like, hey, there's guys out there in the operations, man, they're pressed every single day that unless you worked in the industry on that side, you don't understand the pressures and the stress that these guys go through. So if you're going to make a call to these people, make it meaningful. Don't talk about freight coming out of the gate. That's the least most important thing out there. You want to learn about their operations, their background, and their company. I preach it all the time. Ryan knows it. DJ knows it. Dan knows it, because it's the most important thing that you can do as a service provider is learn their business first. You'll get the freight later, but don't come at them like a bull in a china shop, man, talking about freight capacity and cheap rates. I
can't tell you how, that's not just on the sales side. That's on the pricing side too. Like to be able to price an account, I would hit the road with the sales team. I can't tell you the account, but you'd probably be able to back into it, going to Peoria, Illinois and studying the and meeting them where they're at and talking to the traffic managers in the back of a storeroom at a large shipping facility. It's like, what problems do they have that you can solve?
Yeah. So how can you price something out? It's like, I can't move what I don't know. How do you price something out like that? Right, Ken? There's no possible way because there's so many intricate moves that happen internally in any logistics operation that until you visit or understand or ask those pertinent questions, you're not going to, what I say, uncover those hidden bank opportunities. And it's not really about money and putting it back to your bottom line. It's about relationships more than anything else, where you can go back and then you can, engage with your team and saying, hey, I found out about this customer, we can save them there, we can do this or whatever. It's incredible what people do, and I just feel sorry for them.
I'll say one thing, and then maybe we can end on this point, is that sometimes you find out things that are hiding, right? I had a shipper tell me that they make appointments for 6:00 on Friday, knowing that no one's there to receive it.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to hold the freight until Monday morning. I'm like, why would you tell me that? I'm going to bake in 2.5 days of detention on the price because you just told me that you're going to make me hold the freight.
That's what I think about. So, Ken, DATCon, what are the dates we're looking at for DATCon? I know you mentioned this in Austin.
Yeah, October 5th through 7th in Austin. We'd love for you to come down. There's some, I think we are still extending some promos. If you're interested in joining, we'd love to still have you register. It's not too late to register. And like I said, come down and see us. It's a great time. My whole team will be there. Our market analytics team will be there. Our product team will be there. It's not a sales event. It genuinely is a user event to come and learn more about our products, how to use them, and network with people that are moving freight all over the country right now. So,
and even if you can't make it, you guys do have a show on, I believe, every Tuesday. Can you go over that as well?
Yep, Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. It's me and Dean and assorted guests. We're talking about freight trends we're seeing and answering questions. It's been going for like 2.5 years now. I can't believe we haven't been canceled yet. I mean,
it's YouTube, man. It's free. You're not paying for space.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
for sure. All right,
you pay for it with your time.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ken, for coming out this morning. It's truly been a pleasure. Everyone's kind of learned some gold nuggets. Jeff, amazing to see you back here again. Looking forward to tomorrow where we're getting into personal development. We are going to be going live again at 12 and 3 p.m. with our replays for today. Follow our socials, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. Basically see everything there. Like, comment, subscribe, and everybody have an amazing day. Take care.
Thanks. Go Bucks.
Centurion Trucking. Our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion Trucking